Director of National Intelligence, has sparked public concern and private concern over election integrity. Bill Pulte, who is a Trump loyalist and Director of Federal Housing, took over the position on Friday. Not only does he have zero experience in intelligence, but he also has a history of doing the president's bidding by launching probes into Trump's perceived enemies. And now, as acting DNI, he is in a position where he can further peddle Trump's conspiracy theories on election fraud, his lies on election fraud. And Trump clearly had that in mind when he first selected him for the role. Listen to this.
It's an acting position. It's not a permanent. He's not going to be permanent because, I don't think he'd want to be permanent. But he's a very smart guy, and he may find out some things about the rigged elections.
Oh, and Pulte's appointment is not popular. Even some Republicans have been against it. Earlier this week, the Senate attempted to rush through the confirmation of full-time nominee Jay Clayton, which would have kept Pulte out of the position. But Trump stopped that from happening for now, while pressuring Republican senators to pass his Save America Act, which research shows could potentially disenfranchise millions of voters. Joining us now, one of those people who is defending the right to vote, Colorado Secretary of State Jena Griswold. She's also a Democratic candidate for Colorado Attorney General. Thank you so much, Secretary, for joining us. I want to start with some New York Times reporting about Pulte and this connection to intelligence. They write, Gabbard had limits, Tulsi Gabbard, limits to how far she was willing to go with her election claims and declassifications, current and former officials said. Lawmakers and former officials said Mr. Pulte may have few restraints. His record shows that he has a keen sense of what is important to Mr. Trump and an equally strong desire to please him. As a result, officials are bracing for the office to be even more involved in the midterm elections. You're running for office, but in your current position, it is your job to make sure that Coloradoans have equal access to the ballot. When you hear that someone like Bill Pulte could be mucking around in the midterms, how are you defending Coloradoans?
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me on. And we are preparing for an array of contingencies, political contingencies of federal interference, unfortunately. We're preparing with county partners, with state level partners, and we will be ready to confront any type of situation that the federal administration pushes our way. But I do think it's a really sad state of affairs. Instead of our top worry being Russia or Chinese interference, one of our top concerns is interference from our own federal government. And we've been working on contingencies, but also new legislative fixes. And we just worked with the legislature to send out ballots. We're a mail ballot state. We're going to send out mail ballots and open up drop boxes even earlier for the general election. We fortified our interference laws, and we just passed into law a prohibition to make sure that any candidate for the third term of the presidency never appears on the Colorado ballot.
Secretary, to your point about you're ready to confront any situation, especially interference from our own federal government. Listen to what Secretary of Homeland Security Markwayne Mullin had to say when asked whether ICE would be sent to the polls during the midterms. Watch this.
At your hearing recently, you didn't rule out sending ICE agents to the polls in the midterms. Are you willing to rule out sending ICE agents?
No, what I said is that we would only be there if a threat is arised.
So you're not ruling it out here today?
Keep in mind, why would ICE be there? Because the only people that should be voting there is American citizens. There shouldn't be any immigration enforcement. So this should be a mute deal for any Democrat.
Why would there be a circumstance where you would need ICE agents?
Keep in mind, ICE agents are there to flex if we need to.
ICE agents are there to flex if we need to. As Secretary of State, the elections in Colorado are under your purview. Your reaction to what the Secretary just said there?
No voter should await intimidation at the ballot box. And this administration is clearly hoping to intimidate or suppress the vote. The new DHS secretary is an election denier, so unfortunately, it is not surprising to hear that from him. To be very clear, it is illegal under federal law for any type of federal law enforcement to interfere with the administration of American elections. So, I think to an extent, this is an attempt to spook Americans into self-suppression. And we just have to be strong. American voters need to make a plan to vote. Know your Democratic secretaries of state have contingencies in place against any type of interference. But the bigger picture, Jonathan, is that Trump has weaponized the federal government against American democracy. DHS is just one example, putting an election denier into such a high-ranking position to undermine the right to vote. But Colorado is going to continue to fight back. States across the nation are fighting back. And luckily, the courts have largely stopped Trump's plans to take control of American elections. The DOJ is suing multiple states over sensitive voter data that they're trying to collect. Well, they're largely losing in court. Trump's first executive order on election, that has largely been stopped. And we will continue to push back to protect our elections and the right to vote in this country.
And Secretary, just to underscore the fact that this issue is still the beating heart of the MAGA movement, we want to show you some of the candidates that have clinched nominations on, in part, the basis of being election fraud accusers and election deniers. You have Jim Marchant, who clinched the GOP nomination for Secretary of State in Nevada. Rick Jackson, who's now the GOP nominee for Georgia governor. An election fraud accuser, Tim Fleming, who won the nod for Secretary of State. Then, in Colorado's primary, as you are well aware, you have Scott Bottoms, your opponent, Attorney General Dave Wilson, and Secretary of State James Wiley. Sort of related to this is the president's now extremely clear push to get the Save America Act done. The president has obviously sort of connected these two things, that it's necessary in order to fight this alleged election fraud. If this is passed before November, how is it going to impact elections in Colorado and the actual election administration process?
Well, it's a horrible piece of legislation that would disenfranchise potentially millions of Americans all across the country. And I think, again, taking a step back, what Trump is trying to do is suppress the vote. That has been his playbook. Suppress the vote, suppress the vote. He knows that he is highly unpopular. MAGA is highly unpopular going into the midterms. So they continue to push out all these conspiracies to set the groundwork for rejecting the 26 election. And you are absolutely right. Election deniers are running across the country. But the one, or at least one of the pieces of solace is that this is not the first time that MAGA and election deniers are trying to take over election administration or these big offices across the country. It has happened repeatedly, and we have repeatedly rejected them and beat them at the ballot box. I was so proud to be the chair of the Democratic Association of Secretaries of State in the 22 cycle, and we helped beat election deniers in nearly every battleground state where they were running. So democracy is at risk. We are at an unprecedented time, but there is so much optimism. And my optimism lies with the American people to get involved, to make a plan to vote, and to do their part in saving American democracy. I'm going to continue to fight as Secretary of State. I'm running for Attorney General also to continue that fight to save our democracy, but we all really need to lean in to save American democracy in 2026.
Secretary, I'm going to get in trouble with the producers here, but James Wiley, who's running for your position, is an election denier who's running uncontested. And I think I'm having a hard time understanding why there is not a Democratic nominee, why there is not someone who is running against him. Our producers say he's running uncontested. What happened there? Quickly.
So for Secretary of State, there is a Democratic primary. There are two fabulous candidates, and our primary is coming right around the corner in 10 days. So that may be in that primary that they are referring to. But I am very excited to see another strong woman take the helm after the primary and after winning the general election for Secretary of State, and continue to protect the rights of all Colorado voters, Republican, Democrat, and unaffiliated alike.
Colorado's Secretary of State Jena Griswold, as always, thank you for coming to The Weekend.